You're watching Conversationality, a bi-weekly show brought to you by Optionality, your community exploring the now of work. Happy Thursday.
Hello.
Jory Jardins, co-founder of Optionality, here with Elisa Camahort page.
Good afternoon. So it is, I have been traveling over between like middle of February to middle of March. I went on 3 different trips, which is totally out of character for me. So I feel a little like, what day is it? Where are we? What? But actually, it's been great. It's been great to get a little bit out in the world. I went to my first alt summit this last weekend, hosted by Gabrielle Blair, who's an old school, like we've known her 20 years. So that was fun.
Yep. I have to say, Lisa, when you said you were going, I was like, you mean that alt summit?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. You mean like back when I was so gratified to hear that they're still doing great work and doing
Absolutely. It's been 16 years for it now, and I think I never went before because I always thought it wasn't my scene. It's very design. It was, design bloggers and maker bloggers and craft bloggers and like very and fashion maybe and
creators.
yeah. Yes, creators. But like now we all call ourselves creators. So everybody fits. Now it's very much now a very entrepreneurial crowd, very small business owner, and it's all 99% women. And anyway, it was a good time. And I actually, today's topic for conversationality is kind of because of, I went to a session on Substack and it was hosted by, let me get her name because Elisa Zander, who has a Substack called Codependency Alchemy. But she just has a lot of learnings on using Substack. And one of the things she talked about is like, you're creating all this content, give it more life by leveraging it for other things you do. And I'm like, we should try that because this week in particular, Optionality sent out a newsletter by one of our advisors, who's also a guest contributor, Minaa B. And she is a licensed social worker, therapist, author. And she's also, I like to say that she's like the angel on my shoulder. When I feel anxious or anxiety, I try to like channel Minaa because she just has a great way of framing things around mental well-being, around stress and anxiety, around setting boundaries. We've actually had her as a guest on one of our webinars. She's done a guest post before, and she has like the best voice. Like she's just so anyway. Ever since I met her a couple of years ago, I've been like, oh, she is my go-to for trying to stay like calm and connected and like knowing what I want. So we thought we'd talk a little bit more about what she talked about this week, because her subject in this week's newsletter was community care and how we come together and how we can help make ourselves more open to both giving and getting community care and what she calls mutual support, mutual aid. And I think it really resonates because I feel like that's a big, big reason why we started Optionality in the first place, was to provide mutual support and aid for people who were feeling the same way we were. I mean, don't you think, Jory?
Without question. And it's interesting that I read Minaa's piece right around the time as I finally finished Martha Beck's book on anxiety, because similar to Minaa's message, Martha says, okay, if you want to really combat anxiety, there's ways to do that by altering your physical and how you're thinking, of course, like through meditation and things like that, but also by adding more creativity in your life, because you cannot be anxious while you're truly in your creative mode. And I realize that happens for me when I'm writing or when I'm doing my monthly column and I'm really jamming. Everything else just falls away. I don't have that anxiety. And similarly, when I'm in community mode, when I'm connecting with others in the community, we're doing a webinar, we're having a great conversation, I forget all that on the daily basis, plagues me. So her post really resonated because I'm like, yeah, that's why. I always wondered why is it that people in other countries seem so calm? I mean, there are wars going on. There are things that are happening in other places in the world, and yet their people seem much calmer than we are.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm not. Some of it, I think, is stoicism. I mean, she brings up the very first thing she talks about is cultural
Yes.
differences. Her family, her background is from Panama. And so she talks about what the culture is like in Panama and that people will just pop over or they'll yell up from the street or and she says, I cannot imagine in the neighborhoods I've lived in America that, that would work. And you and I kind of had a little exchange in the comments about that. About, well, why is that? Why don't we just call each other out of the blue? Why don't we? And I'm not saying nobody does, but I think that particularly as you go down the generations down to Gen Z, like using the phone as a phone is like very unusual. But also, you don't just pop by. And you had a theory about
It's seen
what?
as an affront, I would say. It's
Yes.
seen as an affront to knock on someone's door or to even give them a phone call. I just say, telemarketer, if I do not know who this person is, like I'm not going to just pick up, nor will I answer the door
Yeah.
because that's just how we're acculturated here in this country.
Yeah. I
For
mean,
better or for worse.
there's a feature on the phone which silences if they're not in your contacts, it goes straight to voicemail. And sometimes it's a pain because you're dealing with a customer service thing and they're going to call you back and you forget to turn that off. And then they go to voicemail. Now you play tag. So I try to remember to turn it off, but mostly it's a lifesaver. And I just get call after call after call that didn't ring, that I didn't see, but it all says spam risk, spam risk, spam risk. And the same with anytime I knock on my door, it's someone who's going to make me feel guilty about not donating to whatever, or, it's like, it's never is never anything good coming just knocking on my door. So I think that there's a reason we're really resistant to it here. But then I think her point is that we're not open to these kind of serendipitous, like just pick up the phone. You brought up something about productivity and how it feels interruptive because a phone call or a door knock is saying, pay attention to me now, as opposed to a text or email, which is asynchronous, right? Do you find, I don't know if I find this, but I hear some people find that they get a lot of people who begin to treat a text or an email like it is a phone call. Like, why aren't you getting back to me right now? Is that your experience with people?
I do get that, especially with
Uh,
Slack and for when I'm working with clients, for
oh,
example, on
Slack.
Slack, and it's like,
Yeah.
"Hey, I Slacked you." And I'm like, "Yes, you did. Did you see my Slack?" "No, I'm not working on that right now." Slack is meant to be, I mean, yes, it's kind of like IM or DM, right? You can direct
Yeah.
message. But I think that there's a rolling interpretation of what that means.
Yeah.
And what really struck me about Mina's article, well, her piece, was that I think in this society, and I was thinking about my kids, I immediately went to my kids. They're not trained to accept that sort of spontaneity. We don't value it, but we also don't teach our kids to just take things as they come. I mean,
Mm,
I had this really interesting interaction with my daughter, 14. And we were making dinner and I asked her for some help. She was washing the dishes. And for a moment, I just stood there and she's like, "Why are you looking at me?" And I was like, "How are you? Like, what's going on?" She's like, "You're freaking me out. Okay. I don't know what you want, but I'm just going to wash the dishes." And I was like, "No, I just thought we're here together. Why don't we have a chat? Why don't we, and there was nothing else there, but I think that is not a common interaction. And yet what are the things that really are meaningful in our lives are things that often happen spontaneously, like
yeah.
showing up for an event and meeting someone who made you think about something you never thought about before.
Yeah. We were talking about that this last weekend at the conference about trying to get away from especially because it was a conference full of people who are very optionality driven. Many of them have side hustles. Many of them have many irons in the fire, multiple revenue streams. Like they're doing a lot of stuff. So how do you get away from the question of, so what do you do? And how are the different ways you can try and let people give you a window into who they are without it being about what their job is. I tend to say, so what lights you up, or what are you super into right now? But other people have other ways of doing that. I think that this whole conversation, though, about synchronous communication versus asynchronous. So I don't think Slack was designed to be synchronous, but people begin to treat it like synchronous, that you should, like you're in a phone conversation, where you have to, that's the thing, you have to answer. Like if someone, that's the thing she was saying in her post, is that some people feel really stressed out by phone calls because you can't see the person, and therefore you're wondering what they're thinking. And if there's a pause, and the pause is probably just them being distracted or thinking, but you don't see anything, there's no visual cue, and you're silent. So it's really interesting. And I think it's very relevant to this whole hybrid work, remote work. I think people began to turn to Slack to replace being in an office together and popping in on each other. But maybe that's not its best use, because, and you can put a little status. And when I was working at the Crew, there was a culture of the status really being updated frequently, so that someone would say, focus time 1 hour or whatever. And at the time, I thought it was sort of like, wow, this seems like overkill. But to what you're talking about, like maybe that would really just make everyone's lives easier if we did do that.
Yeah, my Slack hygiene sucks. I'll just say that up front. It's like one more thing to have to adjust.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But you're right. That could be helpful.
There are tools now where you can work together remotely, but sort of be like in the same room. My significant other everyone on his team was working on the same project, and they had like this 2-week run where they were like really in a sprint. And so I don't remember what tool they used, but they kind of basically all got on this tool. Maybe it was just Zoom, but you could turn your camera and audio off, but you were all there, logged in, I think video and audio off. But if someone needed something, they could pop on and be like, okay, I need help with this. And then people could sidebar. And I think that's interesting. And I think there are some tools that are actually designed for that. I think there's one called Cave Day, is it? Or there's some tools where it's designed for that, where people work in a group and kind of pop in and pop out, and trying to emulate, because everyone who wants people to go back to the office always talks about, the serendipity of hallway conversations. And I'm like, all my hallway conversations were always about like TV shows or, something totally unrelated to work, but maybe that's just me.
Well, I also wonder though, how, the other takeaway from Mina's piece was really about community and how it has like a calming effect. And right now, many of us are we're stressed out. We're in a very uncertain place. There are people losing their jobs. We don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next. And where do you turn? I mean, there's obviously self-soothing and there's meditation and other things like that. And I think Mina really hit on something that's natural in other cultures that we really have lost the art of, which is turning to others and having this connection with others to help us sort of, I'd say, shoulder this burden of uncertainty together. There's no guarantees behind it, but there's something again, it's like you can't be stressed when you are creative or in the middle of creation. I personally can't be stressed when I'm in a community of people who share my stress. That was my take.
So her final takeaway is, I think, this really impactful sentence where she says, let me read it exactly. You can't hide and expect to be seen. And I think that has so many, like, it's relevant to so many things about how we hide, how we literally hide, like we don't put on video or we don't join things, how we hide by only sharing certain elements of what's going on and then feel disappointed that we don't get outreach for the thing we never shared was happening. I think that's, I've never personally been I've never felt like everyone I talk to online is only telling me their highlight reels. Like, I feel like the original blogging ethos, at least in the women's blogosphere and the blog her sphere, if you will, was very much about authenticity and talking real shit and like talking about like what wasn't so great as well as what's great. And maybe Instagram was sort of the onset of like creating an airbrushed impression of your life. So that's never been my personal experience that everybody's only posting their highlight reels. But I think I hear a lot of people talk about that they get a lot of, not of either FOMO or inferiority, feelings from looking what everybody else is doing online. And I think actually LinkedIn, I think I have talked about how LinkedIn
Oh, yeah.
sometimes is like that. Like everybody's doing something amazing. Everybody's getting an award. Everybody's doing this, that, and the other. And so I think for your professional life, maybe LinkedIn is the equivalent of Instagram with everyone sharing their highlight reels.
Sure. I think one of the things that I've most appreciated about doing optionality with you is that we hear everyone else's stories, whether they're the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we know
Yeah.
that we're not alone with them. I mean, that's going to be the most healing thing of them all.
Yeah.
But there's still quite a few. I wrote a piece about South by because when you were away, I went to South by and
Yeah.
but under very different auspices. Like normally I've got my set of meetings. I did have a client engagement, which was awesome, but I also had a party where I
Yeah.
just was going to see what happened. And there was a lot of spontaneity that was built in. And I didn't actually plan it that way, but I was so glad that I did. And I wrote about that.
Mm-hmm.
And strangely, I've had more people reach out and just say, "Can we just talk?" And when I got on a call with them, not really knowing what we were talking about, they said that piece really resonated for them. And I think it was because there is this shared desire to actually have someone to not just commiserate with, but just to have a real conversation with. I want
Yeah.
to talk to you about what I'm dealing with. I don't want to give you my resume right now. I want to just
Yeah.
talk about this. And in several cases, they were kind of in transition
Yeah.
and were not looking for a role, or they weren't, seeking that kind of support. They just wanted to say thanks. That was kind
Yeah.
of helpful to me to understand that maybe I'm okay.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. That's, yeah. I mean, I'm a big, like, when you are in like collective experiences and you're talking about like success, uh, and I think that, a lot of the people at Alt Summit, we're trying to be successful at what they're doing. And I think you hear a lot of like, you got to know what to say no to. You got to set your boundaries. You got to, like, saying yes to something means you have to say no to something else. So be super conscious about your no's. And I've been known to say, like, oh, I usually follow the yes until the no becomes obvious. And
Mhm.
I feel that way about all these conversations that, I'm talking to people because things happen. That's how things happen, actually. Like I've in my career and in just my personal life, I'm not sure that most things didn't happen because I happened to run into someone or talk to someone or, stay in contact with someone who then serendipitously was like, oh, this is happening or that's happening. Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And I'm like, sure. And I don't know if that's just because I'm better at that than I am at like strategizing and planning and going and getting the specific thing I want. Or maybe I don't think I really, the other part might be that I'm like always like, I don't know, I could want a lot of things. Like there's a lot of things that are interesting. There's a lot of things that could be fun. There's a lot of things like everyone tells you to niche it down. Everyone tells you to narrow, and I'm so resistant to that. And that is I think that's a strength and a weakness, actually. I mean, I think it goes both ways. Um, but yeah, I'm never that person. I'm always that person that's like, yeah, I mean, I just want to like keep all my options open and like talk to all the people and then figure out and do a bunch of different things. But I guess, I've gotten this far and it's worked pretty well for me. So I don't know if I'm really motivated to change, even if I'm not getting the same results.
Well, early days in the blogosphere when at least I did a personal blog and it was somewhat professional, but not really. Like I wasn't trying to, put out the shingle with it. But I
Yeah.
had opportunities that came to me because we were of like minds. Like, hey, I appreciated your perspective on that, was curious about, and those were opportunities that emerged. I think that you open yourself to these kinds of opportunities by
Yeah.
simply being present for it, by being
Yeah.
available and having that opportunity. I mean, maybe that's also what Mina's getting at, is
Yeah.
by,
She is.
being seen.
Yeah, it's funny. We had our so premium members of Optionality. We do working groups based on what people are working on. So we have this working group about personal positioning, and people who are in transition often are struggling with, how do I articulate who I am, what I bring, what I want, and how do I direct those efforts. So we meet every couple of weeks, and it's exactly that kind of thing that I am super resistant about. Like, I'm not a personal brand. I'm like a human who's interested in lots of things and good at lots of different things. And, but it doesn't help you. It's not, I totally appreciate the need sometimes to be able to say, yes, but what do you do? And how do you do it? And like, who do you do it for? If you want to be paid money, like if you just want to have great conversations all day, do what I do. And you will have just tons of people you have great conversations with. But I do understand the value. I did want to read. She has some small steps if you're trying to build connections but feeling anxious about it. She has a whole thing in the post about why we're afraid and why we're afraid, what kinds of fears we have about building community. But she has these steps to try to leave yourself more open. And the first is to start small, and that connection doesn't have to mean you have a deep soul-bearing conversation with everybody. You could say good morning to a neighbor. You could chat with your barista. I do actually chat. There's a couple baristas at my local place I go every day who I know by name. They know me, and we have like a little chat. And they're probably like 30 years younger than me, but it doesn't matter. And she's the second is communicate your needs. So know what your needs are, set boundaries. If you don't, it's okay to let people know you'd prefer to text, a phone call, or whatever it is. The third is reframe your social anxiety. I love this, which is don't assume people are judging you. And she says this thing, which I actually like to remind people, remind yourself that most people are focused on themselves, and shift your mindset from what if I do something to embarrass myself to what if they're just as nervous as I am. And that's one of my Buffy the Vampire Slayer life lessons, which is no one's thinking about you. They're all so super into their own issues. And especially now in such a stressful time, find low pressure environments, like join a volunteer group or a book club or a workout class, just something where you're around people, but don't necessarily have to become besties with everyone. Practice self-compassion. That's always good advice. And then this last one, practice receiving care. And that means when someone says, and there's a whole school of thought around when you meet someone. I know people who do this, who say, what can I do for you? As their kind of, how can I help you? And I always feel quite flummoxed by that question. Because on the one hand, probably not that you can't do that much. And on the other hand, there's too many things, right? So when someone reaches out to you, when someone extends their hand of friendship, like how do you respond? How do you respond, Jory, when someone says, how can I help you?
I've gotten a lot better at it. And here's why, because when someone has taken me up on it, I feel good. Like, oh, wow. I gave they gave me something and now they're letting me kind of return the favor. So I realized that it's okay. It's okay to, return or have the favor returned. It's not, but it took me a while. It happened somewhat recently. And I was like, actually, and I thought about it and thought, oh, well, this person knows somebody and I want to have a connection with this person to discuss something, maybe a little intro.
Yeah.
Great.
This woman, Elisa, who gave the Substack session at Alt Summit, I went up to her afterwards and I'm like, and you and I have talked about this, Jory, how their Substack introduced this way that you could follow Substackers without subscribing. And when it first happened, I didn't think too much about it. It didn't seem to have that big of an impact. But now I'm looking, and like every week we get more follows than subscribers by a factor of like 3 or 4. And it's starting to be like a significant percentage of people. And I know that some people want to treat the Substack app like it's Google Reader. And so they go there and they want to follow people that way. That's why that exists. However, it means that they're not really, we can't send them email. We can't see what they're interested in or not interested in. Their data doesn't go into our data about who's looking at what, right? So I asked her what she thought about if she was experiencing this. And she said, yeah, it's not great for the creators that they did that. She goes, but in everything you publish, you could put a little blurb that says, hey, if you're following us, great. But did you ever think about actually being a subscriber? Because then this is why it'll be good for you. And this is why it's good for us. She goes, we don't explicitly ask enough. We kind of obfuscate our calls to action because we feel like, oh, I don't want to be too much. I don't want to ask too much. She goes, but it's completely, if that person wants to say no, it's the easiest thing in the world for them to ignore your request because you're not right there in front of them. So just ask people. And I was like, oh, ask for what you want. Yeah. Okay. Who knew? Who would have thought?
So expect a little inbox love asking, from us asking for, hey, you're following us. Want to keep
but that's the thing. It can't be in the inbox. It'll have to be in the app. That's where they're reading us.
The app, right? Okay.
So maybe they're like, well, I don't want you in my inbox. Okay, fair enough. But you gotta, she's like, I realized I was not explicitly inviting people to do the other things I wanted them to do. I wasn't telling them about it. I wasn't giving them the opportunity to know my for her, it was the premium membership. Like she wasn't. And I'm like, oh, we're not really doing that either, actually. Like if you look at so I'm like, okay. So it was sometimes it's good to have someone just kind of shake you and go, you give a lot of people really good advice, but do you take your own advice? And I'm like, often I do not. So
I see a future workshop, the art of the ask.
Yeah.
Getting people comfortable with different ways of asking.
Yeah. And I think it's very different if you're making an ask to a large anonymous group of people versus making an ask to a single person, making general asks versus making super specific. I mean, there's a lot of different asks we make in life. And I think we attach all sorts of feelings and judgment to our asking, depending on that. Whereas I don't think the people receiving the asks perhaps are doing the same. They are not giving it the same amount of analysis and having the same feelings about it at all.
And if they are, who cares?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the other thing, right? If they are, who cares? Then they're not my vibe. Then, that's the other thing. True. Right. Is that, you can only be you and you are not for everyone. And that's okay. Like that's a whole other layer. Anyway, when we post this, we'll put a link to Minaa's post. Really recommend that you read it and that you subscribe, not follow, obviously, on our Substack. But yeah, optionality, we're really about trying to provide that community. A lot of the people in our community are exploring transitions that have happened to them now or whether they want to transition, and it's scary and times are uncertain. So we're just trying to provide that mutual support and aid. And that's why her topic really, I thought, was so on point for what we're doing.
Hear, hear.
So
I couldn't say better. And like Elisa asked me when we were doing our webinar to actually explain what we do. So thank you for asking for me to do that because I completely forget every time. So thank you.
I have forgotten too. And I'm like, oh, we never said what we do. We never said anything about where to even find us. So we do this conversationality every 2 weeks. And after we record it live, we also send it out to all our members. So you don't have to worry about just watching it live, but you can find us at optionality.life and check out both our public membership, which is no cost, and our premium membership, which includes a whole other community that we're building off of Substack, and which is where some action is happening around, more action is happening around that mutual aid and support and exploration of leading a more optionality-driven life. So we hope you'll join us.